Page 189. Mom never told Dad that I'd urged her to leave him. That summer, he still thought of me as his biggest supporter. And given that there was so little competition for the job, I probably was. One afternoon in June, Dad and I were sitting out on the porch, our legs dangling over the side, looking down at the houses below. That summer, it was so hot I could barely breathe. It seemed hotter than Phoenix or Battle Mountain, where it regularly climbed above 100 degrees. So when Dad told me it was only 90 degrees, I said the thermometer must be broken. But he said no, we were used to dry desert heat, and this was humid heat. It was a lot hotter, Dad pointed out, down in the valley along Stewart Street, which was lined with those cute brick houses that had their neat square lawns or corrugated aluminum breezeways. The valleys trapped the heat. Our house was the highest on the mountainside, which made it, ergo, the coolest spot in Welch. In case of flooding, as we had seen, it was also the safest. You didn't know I put a lot of thought into where we should live, did you? He asked me. Real estate's about three things, Mountain Goat. Location, location, location. Dad started laughing. It was a silent laugh that made his shoulders shake, and the more he laughed, the funnier it seemed to him, which made him laugh even harder. I had to start laughing too, and soon we were both hysterical, lying on our backs, tears running down our cheeks, slapping our feet on the front porch. We'd get too winded to laugh any further, our sides cramping with stitches, and we'd think our fit was over, but then one of us would start chuckling, and that would get the other going. And again, we'd both end up shrieking like hyenas. Like their situation is so desperate they can do nothing but laugh at it. The main source of relief from the heat for the kids in Welch was the public swimming pool, down by the railroad tracks near the Esso station. Brian and I had gone swimming once, but Ernie Goad and his friends were there, and they started telling everybody that we Walses lived in garbage and would stink up the pool water something awful. This was Ernie Goad's opportunity to take revenge for the Battle of Little Hobart Street. One of his friends came up with the phrase health epidemic, and they were going on to the parents and lifeguards that we needed to be ejected to prevent an outbreak at the pool. Brian and I decided to leave. As we were walking away, Ernie Goad came up to the chain link fence. Go on home to the garbage dump, he shouted. His voice was shrill with triumph. Go on now, and don't come back. A week later, with the heat still holding, I ran into Denisha Hewitt downtown. She had just come from the pool and had her wet hair pulled back under a scarf. Brother, that water felt good, she said, drawing out the word good so it sounded like it had 15 O's in it. Do you ever go swimming? They don't like us to go there, I said. Denisha nodded, even though I hadn't explained. Then she said, why don't you come swimming with us in the morning? By us, I knew she meant the other Black people. The pool was not segregated. Anyone could swim at any time, technically at least. But the fact was that all the Black people swam in the morning, when the pool was free, and all the white people swam in the afternoon, when admission was 50 cents. No one had planned this arrangement, and no rules enforced it. That was just the way it was. I surely wanted to get back in that water, but I couldn't help but feel that if I took Denisha up on her offer, I'd be violating some sort of taboo. Wouldn't anybody get mad, I asked. 'Cause you're white, she asked. Your own kind might, but we won't. And your own kind won't be there. The next morning, I met Denisha in front of the pool entrance, my thrift shop one piece rolled inside my frayed gray towel. The white girl clerking the entrance booth gave me a surprised look when we passed through the gate, but she said nothing. The women's locker room was dark and smelled like pine sol, with cinder block walls and a wet cement floor. A soul tune was blasting out of an 8-track tape player, and all the Black women packed between the peeling wooden benches were singing and dancing to the music. In the locker rooms I'd been in, the white women always seemed embarrassed by their nakedness and wrapped towels around their waist before slipping off their underpants. But here, most of the women were buck naked. Some of them were skinny with angular hips and jutting collarbones. Others had big pillowy behinds and huge swinging breasts, and they were bumping their butts together and pushing their breasts up against each other as they danced. As soon as the women saw me, they stopped dancing. One of the naked ones came over and stood in front of me, her hands on her hips, her breasts so close I was terrified her nipples were going to touch me. Denisha explained that I was with her and that I was good people. The women looked at one another and shrugged. I was going on 13 and self-conscious, so I planned to slip my bathing suit on underneath my dress. But I worried this would only make me more conspicuous, so I took a deep breath and stepped out of my clothes. The scar on my ribs was about the size of my outstretched hand, and Denisha noticed it immediately. I explained that I had gotten it when I was 3, and that I'd been in the hospital for 6 weeks getting skin grafts, and that was why I never wore a bikini. Denisha ran her fingers lightly over the scar tissue. It ain't so bad, she said. Hey, Nisha, one of the women shouted. Your white friend's got a red bush coming in. What did you expect? Denisha asked. That's right, I said. Collar gotta match the cuffs. It was a line I'd heard Denisha use. She smiled at it, and the women all shrieked with laughter. One of the dancers bumped her hip up against mine. I felt welcome enough to give a saucy bump back. Denisha and I stayed in the pool all morning, splashing, practicing the backstroke and the butterfly. She flailed around in the water almost as much as I did. We stood on our hands and stuck our legs out of the water, did underwater twists, and played Marco Polo and chicken with the other kids. We climbed out to do cannonballs and watermelons off the side, making big geyser-like splashes intended to drench as many people sitting poolside as possible. The blue water sparkled and churned white with foam. By the time the free swim was over, my fingers and toes were completely wrinkled, and my eyes were red and stinging from the chlorine, which was so strong it wafted up from the pool in a vapor you could practically see. I'd never felt cleaner. That afternoon, I was alone in the house, still enjoying the itchy, dry feeling of my chlorine-scoured skin and the wobbly bone feeling you get from a lot of exercise, when I heard a knock on the door. The noise startled me. Almost no one ever visited us at 93 Little Hobart Street. I opened the door a few inches and peered out. A balding man carrying a file folder under his arm stood on the porch. Something about him said government, a species Dad had trained us to avoid. Is the head of the household in? He asked. Who wants to know? I said. The man smiled the way you do to sugarcoat bad news. I'm with child welfare, and I'm looking for Rex or Rosemary Walls, he said. They're not here, I said. How old are you? He asked. 12. Can I come in? I could see he was trying to peer behind me into the house. I pulled the door all the way closed except for a crack. Mom and Dad wouldn't want me to let you in, I said. Until they talk to their attorney, I added to impress him. Just tell me what it is you're after, and I'll pass on the message. The man said that someone whose name he was not at liberty to disclose had called his office recommending an inquiry into conditions at 93 Little Hobart Street, where it was possible that dependent children might be living in a state of neglect. No one's neglecting us, I said. You sure? I'm sure, mister. Your dad work? Of course, I said. He does odd jobs, and he's an entrepreneur. He's developing a technology to burn low-grade bituminous coal safely and efficiently. And your mother? She's an artist, I said, and a writer and a teacher. Really? The man made a note on a pad. Where? I don't think Mom and Dad will want me talking to you without them here, I said. Come back when they're here. They'll answer your questions. Good, the man said. I will come back. Tell them that. He passed a business card through the crack in the doorway. I watched him make his way down to the ground. Careful on those stairs now, I called. We're in the process of building a new set. After the man left, I was so furious that I ran up the hillside and started hurling rocks, big rocks that it took 2 hands to lift, into the garbage pit. Except for Irma, I had never hated anyone more than I hated that child welfare man, not even Ernie Goad. At least when Ernie and his gang came around yelling that we were trash, we could fight them off with rocks. But if the child welfare man got it into his head that we were an unfit family, we'd have no way to drive him off. He'd launch an investigation and end up sending me and Brian and Lori and Maureen off to live with different families, even though we all got good grades and knew Morse code. I couldn't let that happen. No way was I going to lose Brian and Lori and Maureen. I wish we could do the skedaddle. For a long time, Brian, Lori, and I had assumed we would leave Welch sooner or later. Every couple of months, we'd ask Dad if we were going to move on. He'd sometimes talk about Australia or Alaska, but he never took any action. And when we asked Mom, she'd start singing some song about how her get up and go had got up and went. Maybe coming back to Welch had killed the idea Dad used to have of himself as a man going places. The truth was, we were stuck. When Mom got home, I gave her the man's card and told her about his visit. I was still in a lather. I said that since neither she nor Dad could be bothered to work, and since she refused to leave Dad, the government was going to do the job of splitting up the family for her. I expected Mom to come back with one of her choice remarks, but she listened to my tirade in silence. Then she said she needed to consider her options. She sat down at her easel. She had run out of canvases and had begun painting on plywood. So she picked up a piece of wood, got out her palette, squeezed some paints onto it, and selected a brush. "What are you doing?" I asked. "I'm thinking," she said. Mom worked quickly, automatically, as if she knew exactly what it was she wanted to paint. A figure took shape in the middle of the board. It was a woman from the waist up, with her arms raised. Blue concentric circles appeared around the waist. The blue was water. Mom was painting a picture of a woman drowning in a stormy lake. When she was finished, she sat for a long time in silence, staring at the picture. "So what are we going to do?" I finally asked. "Jeanette, you're so focused, it's scary." "You didn't answer my question," I said. "I'll get a job, Jeanette," she snapped. She threw her paintbrush into the jar that held her turpentine and sat there looking at the drowning woman. Qualified teachers were so scarce in McDowell County that 2 of the teachers I'd had at Welch High School had never been to college. Mom was able to land a job by the end of the week. We spent those days frantically trying to clean the house in anticipation of the return of the child welfare man. It was a hopeless task, given all the stacks of Mom's junk and the hole in the ceiling and the disgusting yellow bucket in the kitchen. However, for some reason, he never came back. Mom's job was teaching remedial reading in an elementary school in Davie, a coal mining camp 12 miles north of Welch. Since we still had no car, the school's principal arranged for Mom to get a ride with another teacher, Lucy Jo Rose, who had just graduated from Bluefield State College and was so fat she could barely squeeze behind the steering wheel of her brown Dodge Dart. Lucy Jo, whom the principal had more or less ordered to perform this service, took an instant dislike to Mom. She refused to say much during the trip, instead playing Barbara Mandrell tapes and smoking filter-tip Kools the entire time. As soon as Mom got out of the car, Lucy Jo made a big show of spraying Mom's seat with Lysol. Mom, for her part, felt that Lucy Jo was woefully unformed. When Mom mentioned Jackson Pollock once, Lucy Jo said that she had Polish blood and therefore did not appreciate Mom using derogatory names for Polish people. Mom had the same problems she'd had in Battle Mountain with organizing her paperwork and disciplining her students. At least one morning a week, she'd throw a tantrum and refuse to go to work, and Lori, Brian, and I would have to get her collected and down the street where Lucy Jo waited with a scowl, blue smoke chugging out of the Dart's rusted through tailpipe. But at least we had money. While I'd been bringing in a little extra cash babysitting, Brian was cutting other people's weeds, and Lori had a paper route, it didn't add up to much. Now, Mom got paid about $700 a month. And the first time I saw her gray-green paycheck with its detachable stub and automated signatures, I thought our troubles were over. On paydays, Mom took us kids down to the big bank across from the courthouse to cash the check. After the cashier gave her the money, Mom went into a corner of the bank and stuffed it into a sock she'd safety pinned to her bra. Then we all scurried around to the power company and the water authority and the landlord, paying off our bills with 10s and 20s. The clerks averted their eyes as Mom fished the sock out of her bra, explaining to everyone within earshot that this was her way of making sure she was never pickpocketed. Mom also bought some electric heaters and a refrigerator on layaway, and we'd go to the appliance store and put down a few dollars every month, figuring they'd be ours by wintertime. Mom always had at least one extravagance on layaway, something we really didn't need, a tasseled silk throw or a cut crystal vase, because she said the surest way to feel rich was to invest in quality non-essentials. After that, we'd go to the grocery store at the bottom of the hill and stock up on staples such as beans and rice, powdered milk, and canned goods. Mom always bought the dented cans, even if they weren't marked down, because she said they needed to be loved too. At home, we'd empty Mom's purse into the sofa bed and count the remaining money. There'd be hundreds of dollars, more than enough to cover our expenses until the end of the month, I thought. But month after month, the money would disappear before the next paycheck arrived, and once more I'd find myself rooting in the garbage at school for food. Toward the end of one month that fall, Mom announced that we had only $1 for dinner. That was enough to buy 1 gallon of Neapolitan ice cream, which she said was not only delicious, but had lots of calcium and would be good for our bones. We brought the ice cream home, and Brian pulled apart the carton and cut the block into 5 even slices. I called dibs on the first one. Mom told us to savor it because we had no money for dinner the next night. Mom, what happened to it all? I asked as we ate our ice cream. Gone, 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 she said. It's all gone. But where? Lori asked. I've got a house full of kids and a husband who soaks up booze like a sponge, Mom said. Making ends meet is harder than you think. It couldn't be that hard, I thought. Other moms did it. I tried quizzing her. Was she spending the money on herself? Was she giving it to Dad? Was Dad stealing it? Or did we go through it quickly? I couldn't get an answer. Give us the money, I said. We'll work out a budget and stick to it. Easy for you to say, Mom replied. Lori and I did work out a budget, and we included a generous allowance for Mom to cover luxuries such as extra-large Hershey bars and cut crystal vases. If we kept to our budget, we believed, we could afford new clothes and shoes and coats and buy a ton of coal at the cheaper off-season price. Eventually, we could install insulation, run a water pipe into the house, and maybe even add a water heater. But Mom never turned the money over to us. So, even though she had a steady job, we were living pretty much like we had before. I'd started 7th grade that fall, which meant attending Welch High School. It was a big school, near the top of a hill looking down on the town, with a steep road leading up. Kids were bussed in from way up in the hollows and from coal camps such as Davie and Hemp Hill that were too small to have their own high school. Some of the kids looked as poor as me, with home-cut hair and holes in the toes of their shoes. I found it a lot easier to fit in than at Welch Elementary. Denisha Hewitt was there too. That summer morning I'd spent swimming with Denisha at the public pool was the happiest time I'd had in Welch, but she never invited me back. And even though it was a public pool, I didn't feel I could go to the free swim unless I had an invitation from her. I saw her again only when school started, and neither of us ever mentioned that day at the pool. I guess we both knew that, given the way people in Welch thought about mixing, it would be too weird for us to try to be close friends. During lunch, Denisha hung out with the other Black kids, but we had a study hall together and passed notes to each other there. By the time she got to Welch High, Denisha had changed. The spark had gone out of her. She started drinking malt ale during school. She'd fill a soda can with Mad Dog 2020 and carry it right into class. I tried to find out what was wrong, but all I could pry from her was that her mother's new boyfriend had moved in with them, and the fit was a little tight. One day, just before Christmas, Denisha passed me a note in study hall asking for girls' names that began with D. I wrote down as many as I could think of: Diane, Donna, Dora, Dreama, Diandra, and then wrote why. She passed a note back saying, I think I'm pregnant. After Christmas, Denisha did not return to school. When a month had gone by, I walked around the mountain to her house and knocked on the door. A man opened it and stared at me. He had skin like an iron skillet and nicotine yellow eyes. He left the store door shut, so I had to speak through the screen. Is Denisha home? I asked. Why do you want to know? I want to see her. She don't want to see you, he said, and shut the door. I saw Denisha around town once or twice after that, and we waved but never spoke again. Later, we all learned she'd been arrested for stabbing her mother's boyfriend to death. The other girls talked endlessly among themselves about who still had their cherry and how far they would let their boyfriend go. The world seemed divided into girls with boyfriends and girls without them. It was the distinction that mattered the most, practically the only one that did matter. But I knew that boys were dangerous. They'd say they loved you, but they were always after something. Even though I didn't trust boys, I sure did wish one would show some interest in me. Kenny Hall, the old guy down the street who was still pining away for me, didn't count. If any boy was interested in me, I wondered if I'd had the wherewithal to tell him, when he tried to go too far, that I was not that kind of girl. But the truth was, I didn't need to worry much about fending off advances, seeing how, as Ernie Gold told me on every available occasion, I was pork chop ugly. And by that, he meant so ugly that if I wanted a dog to play with me, I'd have to tie a pork chop around my neck. I had what Mom called distinctive looks. That was one way of putting it. I was nearly 6 feet tall, pale as a frog's underbelly, and had bright red hair. My elbows were like flying wedges and my knees like tea saucers. But my most prominent feature, my worst, was my teeth. They weren't rotten or crooked. In fact, they were big, healthy things, but they stuck straight out. The top row thrust forward so enthusiastically that I had trouble closing my mouth completely, and I was always stretching my upper lip to try to cover them. When I laughed, I put my hand over my mouth. Lori told me I had an exaggerated view of how bad my teeth looked. They're just a little bucked, she said. They have a certain Pippi Longstocking charm. Mom told me my overbite gave my face character. Brian said they'd come in handy if I ever needed to eat an apple through a knothole in a fence. What I needed, I knew, was braces. Every time I looked in the mirror, I longed for what other kids called a barbed wire mouth. Mom and Dad had no money for braces, of course. None of us kids had ever even been to the dentist. But since I'd been babysitting and doing other kids' homework for cash, I resolved to save up until I could afford braces myself. I had no idea how much they cost. So I approached the only girl in my class who wore braces, and after complimenting her orthodontia, casually asked how much it had set her folks back. When she said $1,200, I almost fell over. I was getting $1 an hour to babysit. I usually worked 5 or 6 hours a week, which meant that if I saved every penny I earned, it would take about 4 years to raise the money. I decided to make my own braces. I went to the library and asked for a book on orthodontia. The librarian looked at me kind of funny and said she didn't have one, so I realized I had to figure things out as I went along. The process involved some experimentation and several false starts. At first, I simply used a rubber band. Before going to bed, I would stretch it all the way around the entire set of my upper teeth. The rubber band was small but thick and had a good tight fit, but it pressed down uncomfortably on my tongue, and sometimes it would pop off during the night, and I'd wake up choking on it. Usually, however, it stayed on all night, and in the morning, my gums would be sore from the pressure on my teeth. That seemed like a promising sign, but I began to worry that instead of pushing my front teeth in, the rubber band might be pulling my back teeth forward. So I got some larger rubber bands and wore them around my whole head, pressing against my front teeth. The problem with this technique was that the rubber bands were tight. They had to be to work. So I'd wake up with headaches and deep red marks where the rubber bands had dug into the sides of my face. I needed more advanced technology. I bent a metal coat hanger into a horseshoe shape to fit the back of my head. Then I curled the two ends outward, so when the coat hanger was around my head, the ends angled away from my face and formed hooks to hold the rubber band in place. When I tried it on, the coat hanger dug into the back of my skull. So I used a Kotex sanitary napkin for padding. The contraption worked perfectly, except that I had to sleep flat on my back, which I always had trouble doing, especially when it was cold. I liked to snuggle down into the blankets. Also, the rubber bands still popped off in the middle of the night. Another drawback was that the device took a lot of time to put on properly. I'd wait until it was dark so no one else would see it. One night, I was lying in my bunk wearing my elaborate coat hanger braces when the bedroom door opened. I could make out a dim figure in the darkness. "Who's there?" I called out, but because I had my braces on, it came out sounding like "Fooder." "It's your old man," Dad whispered. "What's with the mumbling?" He came over to my bunk, held up his Zippo, and flicked it. A flame shot up. "What the Sam Hill's that on your head?" "My brafiv," I said. "Your what?" I took off the contraption and explained to Dad that because my front teeth stuck out so badly, I needed braces, but they cost $1,200, so I had made my own. "Put them back on," Dad said. He studied my handiwork intently, then nodded. "Those braces are a goddamn feat of engineering genius," he said. "You take after your old man." He took my chin and pulled my mouth open. "And I think they're, by God, working."